I'm Todd Crawford.
I'm Eric Zavinski.
We are too cool for the comic shop.
We're too cool for the streets in this episode because we'll be talking about the movie Drive. And I don't even remember when the last time we just talked about one movie for the whole episode, or if it's even happened yet. So this will be a nice change of pace.
Our very first episode was Sonic the Hedgehog.
That's true. Yeah. So we are harkening back to our roots. And just like Sonic the Hedgehog, Ryan Gosling got to go fast in this film.
It's true. And I guess we could just... well, actually, before we get into the plot, I want to talk about the director, Nicholas Winding Refn. Have you seen any of his other films other than Drive?
It's very funny because I was thinking to myself earlier today, one of the comments I'll make on the podcast is that I literally do not know anything about this director or his work.
I'll put it this way. Drive is probably his most mainstream movie. It's the most accessible in many ways.
Okay.
Especially after this film, the aesthetics he kept and continued to build upon in some of the other ones. But this is the one that's like the most plot-driven, character-driven while keeping those kind of art house sensibilities, I suppose you could say. Especially like the neon lighting and everything like that, the kind of synth pop soundtrack, all that. I think this is really the one where whether you... It's one with the crossover appeal. I'll put it that way. It's not my personal favorite Refn movie. It very well could be the best. In terms of movies, I actually kind of prefer the one that followed this one up. Only God Forgives is my favorite. But that's a pretty controversial one. And
interesting. No, you have me intrigued to the rest of his work then, because I figured you would do your research, or that you already knew. So I figured that you would help educate me. But I can definitely see what you're saying in terms of crossover appeal, because this movie has very mainstream actors, recognizable names and faces. But I do think it kind of sounds like it surprised people when it came out, because it is kind of this is a mood piece movie. And that's how I described it to Colton when we watched it yesterday. Because I watched this movie for the first and only time before now during college. My friend Luke, I grew up with him. He is a filmmaker. I mean, he does like wedding videography, and he's made some short films. So I went through a phase where I jumped on Luke's Google account so I could watch some of his movies that he really took inspiration from. And Drive was one of those movies that I watched for free because he was a good friend. So that's how I know about Drive at all. And so that was like 5 years ago almost. And I watched Drive like some college morning during a semester which I didn't have morning classes, and that's just like what I did out of the blue. So I already have nostalgia just because of the weird circumstances. So I watched this movie alone in my couch at like 10 a.m. on a random weekday, and I don't remember the plot super well until I rewatched it, but I remembered how the movie made me feel. I mean, so it's very effective in terms of being this kind of synth existential nightmare city kind of vibe. It's so effective in giving that off.
So what I'm taking from this is that you're confessing to having seen this movie illegally through file sharing.
Sure. I just signed into his account. So is that illegal? Is that file sharing?
I think it is. I don't know. I'm not going to tell anyone.
Well, it's a good thing nobody listens to this podcast.
Yeah.
That's like the equivalent of, hey, we have a different profile for friend Jimmy over here on our Netflix or Disney Plus account. It's whatever, man. I ended up buying the movie, so I redeemed myself, right?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't downloaded movies in a long time. I actually got caught torrenting in high school. And so ever since then, I just don't do that because I'm paranoid.
Yeah. It sounds like you. I can imagine that being your high school experience.
You're probably going to get that knock on the door from the Fed Sunday morning. Like, we know you watched the movie. But yeah, even when I torrented, I would still buy every movie that I downloaded that I liked.
There you go. That's some solid ethics. I mean, so you have the artistic curiosity that you need to satiate, but you also have the moral backbone to back it up.
Yeah, because when you're in high school, you don't have money. You can't go buy every movie.
Yeah, I mean, we're just trying to survive. Entertainment is our food, So that's basically the situation I was in college. It's not like, well, I got a little bit of paycheck from working at the honors department. I didn't make a lot of money during college. So, it's that's where I was at anyway. Yeah. So beyond the piracy discussion, what do you think? I assume in terms of when you say this film is art house, do you mean it kind of focuses more on giving this vibe than the plot? Not to say that the plot is, bad or ignored. But that's what I feel like is this movie's strength.
Yeah, I mean, and I know, like, when you invite a word like art house into the discussion, there's always going to be snobs like, it doesn't seem like Tarkovsky to me. But
right. Well, and that's a very subjective, broad term, and I think it means something different to everybody. What I get from that is that it's more. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it either. It's kind of like this is a very stylistic movie. I guess might be the way I would describe it.
Yeah, it's how I would describe it is the best way I could describe it is actually a news article about the movie. When this film came out, it was actually the studio was sued by a disgruntled viewer who came to see the movie thinking it would be like Fast and Furious. Yeah. And I think in that relativity kind of way, yes, I'd say it's more art house than a typical like cool driver gets away from bad guys kind of movie.
Right. Well, I mean, because I don't know. I might sound like a snob in saying this, but to me, that's that's like you expected this movie to be kind of brainless and like it actually had like a message and like a story kind of to it. And I sound like an asshole in saying that, but I think this movie's trying to say something, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, like you think it's going to be about him trying to outrace, the cops, but really it's about how he can't outrace his own loneliness.
Right. And his character arc is very cathartic to see, because I think the movie does do a good job in subverting your expectations, because in the opening scene where he's helping these robbers with their heist, and then he's driving this very common car, the Chevy Impala or whatever, and it's very suspenseful. And I think if you've never seen this movie, you didn't hear anything about it, it's 2011, you're in the theater, I can imagine most people thinking like, oh, this will be a movie about, the perspective of this guy who helps, heists happen. That's really not what it is at all. But that's kind of what the intro kind of gives you. And another side note, it makes me wonder what the book series is like, because apparently Drive is inspired or kind of adapted from an amalgamation of books written by this one author. So maybe some of those books chronicle some of the heist type stuff, and maybe some of those books kind of show this driver's character arc more. And I don't know about that because I haven't looked into the research of it, but it makes me wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I always assumed that this book or this movie took a ton of creative liberties, and just
right.
I feel like they cut a ton more than the average adaptation, because there's just it's a minimalist movie in so many ways.
And they said books plural, so I mean they might be taking little elements from across the whole series of books or something. So I mean, yeah, it probably is kind of one of those adaptations where it's like, oh, maybe very, very, very loosely. That's interesting to me, though.
One thing I want to commend the movie for right off the bat is the intro, because it's really just a great short film when you break it down.
I agree.
It establishes the driver character. It shows that even though, I mean, Ryan Gosling at that point, he was in The Notebook. I think that's what he was most known for. Now, he was in other movies that were great, such as it's one of my favorites. I gotta remember this, I'm gonna be so upset. Half Nelson.
Was it before or after Drive? Before?
Well before. He was in Half Nelson. Really great role, one of his best performances. He was in Blue Valentine, in which that's my favorite Ryan Gosling role personally. So he was deviating where he was a more complex actor than a pretty boy, but I don't know if he was a badass quite yet. And so in Drive, what's fascinating in the beginning when he says like you have 5 minutes and you see the clock ticking, it established immediately this character, even though he does have this sensitive look, at the end of the day, like, he'll get down to business. He will fuck shit up. And it doesn't show it either. It's pretty tense when you're waiting for that other dude, the brother, I believe. I think they're brothers or best friends or whatever. Getting in the car. You
keep saying, come on, and keeps looking at the rear view mirror. And it feels like it lasts for like 2 minutes. But, even if it lasts for 30 seconds, it's that effective.
Yeah, I've seen this movie like 5 times. I saw it in theaters. I saw it with so many friends introducing them to this movie. And every time, it's so tense in that point. And then you get the chasing, which is funny because the chasing isn't really much of a showstopper. It's really not about like doing a donut to get away from the cops or whatever to get in the other lane or anything.
Right.
It's pretty subdued, and that's cool though. I think that gives it weight for the rest of the movie that when things do happen, it's not like they're like jumping cars outside of a off an army helicopter or whatever like Fast and Furious does.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this movie kind of makes you think. It's like, I don't know if this kind of profession exists in the underworld, but it feels like it could. Like the drivers who are very skilled at pulling off that part of the job, but they don't concern themselves with anything else in the job. It's a very interesting premise, but it's very grounded because, makes sense that in order to continue their profession, they don't want to be involved in the before and after, because a lot of people get caught or leave a trail of evidence. It's just a very well-built premise, I think. And it feels realistic, even if it maybe doesn't happen in real life. But maybe it does. How many drivers do you think are out there that do Ryan Gosling stuff?
38.
38. Yeah, like 38 in the whole country.
Yeah, and I'm going for like Price is Right. So like, as long as I'm under.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And most of them are in the cities. There's one driver of that caliber that's like in rural Nebraska, but most of them are in urban centers.
The funny thing is like with Uber and stuff, and there might be a lot more where it's like someone's like, "Hey, I know that we're going to, across town, but like, can we stop at Get Go and I could get a drink?" And like, you have 5 minutes. Like weaving in and out of traffic to get there as fast as possible.
Yeah. It's like, I don't care what you do with your slushy before or after the drive, but I will protect that slushy and I will transport that slushy during the job. So, I can see it.
So
I think we just came up with a short film parody idea.
That would be pretty fun. That could be an SNL digital short. But the thing
that'd be good.
At the end of the intro, right before the credits come on, at that point where he parks the car and he gets the jacket out and flips it. You get the scorpion jacket, which is now, of course, iconic. And then all of a sudden, Zavinski comes on. And you get the Grand Theft Auto Vice City font. You get the synth pop. And it is just like... I remember watching it for the first time. For the first time I saw it, even though I did see it on the big screen, the first time I saw it was just on my laptop, freshman year of college in my dorm. And at that moment when the music kicks in, it's so infectious, and you're just like totally on board at that point in the movie.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just cool. I mean, like, to risk sounding like just simple, it's just there's not even that much to analyze about it. Like, swagger of the character you understand completely by that point, and I think before he parks the car and acts like he's just some random sports fan, I think some viewers might still think like, oh, he's in it for the heist. He's in it for how that turns out. And he's literally just ditching these guys, doesn't even look at them. And there's just something really, like you said, this is that badass persona that it sounds like, was new to him at the time. Um, yeah, just the music is great. I love synth 80s electronic sounding, all of that shit. That's kind of my one of my favorite genres of music. So I'm definitely biased. Yeah, it's definitely infectious is the right word.
Yeah, the soundtrack is a major part of this film, almost as much as the cinematography. And
I agree.
not only does it really help the emotional part, and it really shouldn't. Like, I believe the track was recorded by a band called College, but The Real Human Being, that song, when that plays, for some reason, it shouldn't work. It should be corny. But it just works. I can't explain it.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about that, like watching it again, and like the lyrics, they seem too on the nose for like kind of subtlety of the movie, but it just worked. I don't know. I do agree, because I had that same kind of reaction. I was like, man, any other movie playing this song would be cheesy, and I think it works because the non Ryan Gosling's character, who literally is unnamed and doesn't ever get a name, he's driver in the credits. That character is so finessed and like delicate, because he if you make him like too badass or too cool, then you risk overstepping and making them cheesy. But if he's like too subdued and too silent, pretty boy, then the movie's not effective, and you kind of lose your character arc of him caring about this family, and him kind of coming to terms with his, in my opinion, like his morals kind of evolve throughout the film, and I think that loneliness is a driving factor, but pun intended. But if his character wasn't walking that tightrope of becoming more human, that song wouldn't work. But I think that tightrope is pretty well done.
Like you're saying at the beginning of the film, he doesn't even look at the other people he drives, but at the end of the film, he's just looking out for other people. And
yeah, no, that's a very good way to put it. That's a very good way to put it.
And the best thing about the soundtrack for me is when you're driving and you just listen to it, and it's like those memes on the internet where it's like some nerd on the computer and he's like posting a picture of the character from Drive, like he's literally me, and it's some neck beard mouth breather.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely that kind of bringing it back to Sonic is definitely the kind of Shadow the Hedgehog complex, but maybe for adults. I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah, you're listening to like Night Song, and it's like the bass like bump, and you feel badass, and you're at the red light, and then it turns green. You're like, no, you go, and you're waving the person on. They're like, you. You're like, no, you. And you got your toothpick in your mouth, and you feel like a fucking hard ass.
Right. I think the toothpick is probably one of the cheesier elements. Like he pulls it off, but my whole thing about toothpicks is like, what's the point? If I don't see like the practical use in like some part of an aesthetic, I'm like, wait, well, why does he have the toothpick? Just to look cool? And then he basically, the character like confirms that, because he's like helping with the groceries, and he's like to the kid, he's like, you want a toothpick? Kind of like acknowledging like, yeah, I know the toothpick's cool. Do you want a toothpick as well to be cool?
Yeah, it's funny because like a toothpick really isn't cool. And
right.
I
like if you
thought,
think about it outside of context, it makes no sense. It's kind of lame, right?
I always thought it was a thing where it's like the good guy, the cool James Dean type would always smoke a cigarette, but you can't really do that
right.
now in movies with the good guys. Always a bad guy, so now he has a toothpick. And I always thought maybe this is a stretch, but he has a toothpick because maybe he's a former smoker, and that gives the same kind of thing, having something dangling from your lips.
Yeah, my headcanon is that he's just a tryhard, honestly. I don't think the character has ever done like any drugs or alcohol. I literally think he's so addicted to driving that is his drug. That's my headcanon. Because like his sleep deprivation, I think that's part of his addiction too. Because like Bryan Cranston's like, man, he looks like shit, like really early on in the movie. And it's like, yeah, man. And see, like they really pull off like his eyes, like dude looks sunken in this movie. I don't know if that's just like a makeup department, like talent, but like I was like marveling at that when I was rewatching it. It was like his eyes actually look sunken in, like he doesn't get any sleep. Stuff like that is more impressive to me than like big fancy makeup shows.
Yeah, and this is off topic, but remember we both wrote for the Odyssey in college, the Odyssey Online.
Oh yes, got to plug our old work that's like 5 years old.
Yeah, those articles are still up, so don't read half mine because I'll lose my job. But but
Fair enough.
my profile picture on there, or whatever it is, my contributor picture was a parody of the Drive thing, where instead of a toothpick, I had one of the flossers in my mouth.
Oh man, I remember this. Yeah, man. Glad I don't think I ever talked with you about it, so I didn't realize it was a specifically like a Drive reference, but I'm glad it is.
Yeah, I think I'm the only person who got that joke who I didn't explain it to, but it was worth it for me.
Well, self-validation is all you need, man. I'm glad 5 years later we get to share it with Ian, maybe 2 or 3 other people.
Yeah. I'll finally get my credit.
The credit you deserve. I mean, I think really just to describe this whole movie, right? It's like is edgy, but edgy in all the right ways. Like it fully commits to being edgy. And it's not afraid to like, it's edgy, but it also commits. Like something that struck me was just how much gore is in this movie. I kind of forgot how gory this movie became in like the second half. Because most of the other stuff was more iconic to me. Like one of the most iconic scenes was him stomping on the dude's skull in the elevator. And I remembered that scene partially, but I didn't remember that they show basically like this watermelon like gushing out blood for like a second. Like I didn't remember that part, and I was like, oh shit, and then there's tons of other scenes that are equally if not more gory than that.
Oh, definitely. And the big one, and I gotta take just a second to talk about the cast, because like you mentioned earlier, you got fucking Bryan Cranston, we got Russ Tamlin, Christina Hendricks, Oscar Isaac before he was huge, Carey Mulligan, Albert Brooks. It's really impressive for such a modest movie. But
I know the cast is incredible. Absolutely.
Oscar Isaac's really good in the movie, in a very brief role, but it's memorable. And he gets killed off early, which would come to a surprise to people today because he's in Star Wars. But back then he was just some guy. But then afterwards, you get Christina Hendricks' death, which I believe is in slow motion. They're in a motel, and Ryan Gosling he even messes her up some, and then someone just points a shotgun into the room and just blows her brains out, and it's so messy and so violent, but yet there's this elegance to it. In an interview, the director referred to the scene as an orgasm, and it's very interesting to me how he does merge this beauty with just depravity and just brutal violence. It's always been fascinating to me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's definitely a difference. I mean, if you ever look up like real gore online, like obviously the depravity is all there is, because it's like security camera footage or some other like bullcrap. So to have the stomach and the artistic vision, do the slow motion, to do the shot composition, to do all of that stuff, it is like an art form. It fascinates me because there are folks who have to like edit that and like maybe do some digital touch up and the effects and all of that stuff, and they have to look at that And they have to be in this headspace of this horrible scene, like for their job, like all day, or something. And I think about stuff like that a lot, with video games too, especially with video games, but like movies as well. Like that's just a certain kind of talent, but also kind of like a take one for the team kind of bravery, honestly, because mentally it's probably not healthy to be in that space unless you're artistically strong enough to do so.
Yeah, the scene that gets me, and I'm gonna get into a weird conspiracy theory I read about the movie, but before that, the scene where Albert, this is spoilers, so we already talked about some, so
Right.
whoops. But the movie's
People
pretty
shouldn't be
old.
listening to this podcast about the whole movie at this point.
Yeah, it's a one movie discussion. I mean, what do you expect? But
Exactly.
the scene where Albert Brooks murders Bryan Cranston's character always gets me for a few reasons. Because Cranston's character in this is just so... He reminds me of like a Dick Miller character from back in the 80s or something, where he's a little bit sleazy, but he's lovable. And Albert Brooks' character even mentions at one point, he says he's always had bad luck. And even though Albert Brooks' character doesn't want to kill him, he does, it's just business. But he just slits his... They go to shake hands, he just slits all the way down his forearm, and it's bleeding. And he just Albert Brooks just says, "It's okay, it's over now." And it's something about that death has just always been one of the worst, probably in any movie for me. Something about it's just like that Saving Private Ryan death for Adam. I forget the actor's last name, but the Jewish character who gets killed by the Nazi youth knife. It's up there for me with that.
Right. There's just something like, I think that's the scary part, is that it's an intimate death. It is not like the orgasmic blow your brains out or the shock of Oscar Isaac's character's death. It's very different. It's very different. And I think this movie does that very well too, where every death kind of elicits a different reaction. Like, because when this movie goes like full Mike Myers for a few minutes, and he's wearing the stunt mask and he's fucking over Ron Perlman, I think, right?
Yep.
And they shove his car over the cliff, and then he's not dead yet, so we have to strangle him in the ocean. It actually gives me very strong Blade Runner 2047 vibes. I was like having flashbacks to the end of that movie. It was like, oh man, because like I originally watched Drive before that movie ever released, but the imagery is very similar. But that's kind of like a on the side of the serial killer, kind of rooting for him, even though it's not really what's happening, but it gives you that vibe, which is a completely different, feeling from the despair of like, the shock of Bryan Cranston's character's death. So they just do all of that so well. They feed the iconic moments together so well.
Exactly. And I definitely think Blade Runner 2049 took a lot of influence from Refn and his style, and I think this movie really, I mean, I've heard people say, oh well, this is kind of like Taxi Driver but with like 80s aesthetics, and I don't really agree with that. Like, you could throw any character in a car and make it moody. That doesn't make it Taxi Driver. But
I don't think Drive has like the kind of Taxi Driver, I haven't actually seen Taxi Driver, but am I wrong in saying that Taxi Driver is kind of like the degradation of a character and like their kind of breakdown, where I feel like Drive is the opposite, where it's like it's kind of the moral kind of like Ryan Gosling's character is kind of like becoming this like savior character, and he's being forced into these shitty situations, but he's doing his best to crawl out of it. So I kind of feel like it's almost the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some influence, but like Taxi Driver is a very gritty 70s New York piece about, at the beginning of the movie, Robert De Niro's like giving the soliloquy on voiceover where like, there's trash all over the streets and we need a great rain to wash them out, and this character studying mental illness, and just a very gritty film, whereas this film's the opposite, where it's so over stylized and artificial that it gains a strange, almost AI-esque life because of that. And
I think Taxi Driver is just one of those movies that people try to compare and contrast it to too many other movies, or they think that too many movies are Taxi Driver, but this, but X, but Y, and it's like, yeah, I mean, like the whole comparison game gets kind of old, in my opinion.
Exactly. But
Because a lot of people did that with Joker, and maybe we'll talk about that at some point in the future. But I would really have to see Taxi Driver to kind of like draw those comparisons for itself. But even that didn't seem like a one-to-one thing. Maybe some similar themes, but I think you can gain some inspiration from a movie without it being like, oh, that's the Taxi Driver, but 80s or but superhero. And it's like, yeah, I think there's more complexity to that.
yeah, I mean, I have seen Taxi Driver many times, and I mean, Taxi Driver is a better film than Drive. I mean, it's like comparing any shark movie to Jaws or any possession movie to The Exorcist. Like it's just not fair.
Yeah, right.
But I love both. As far as Joker goes, which is kind of off topic, but really the comparisons for that are much closer to The King of Comedy, which is an interesting, almost spiritual sequel to Taxi Driver with the same creative team. But like, I still think Joker has his own lifeblood and identity to it personally. But I get the comparisons, but I think it's different enough that it has its own thumbprint personally. But as for this film, because since you brought up The Mask and Michael Myers, there's a fascinating conspiracy theory I've heard about the film that I'm not saying it's true, but knowing the director and his weird cinematic fetishes and tendencies, I could see it being an actual thing. Because you remember with Ron Perlman's character especially, the focus on Judaism and lineage in the film.
Yeah, and because he was complaining about, how his family, treats him. He's like 59.
Yeah, and Albert Brooks' character, after he kills Bryan Cranston's character, he takes a knife and puts it in this set of other knives.
Yes.
I'm a little bit hazy on the knife part, but essentially, to my understanding, that's something to do with Jewish culture or tradition. And so the scene where Gosling is looking in on Ron Perlman before killing him, he has the mask on, right?
Yep.
The mask is a skinhead. It's a bald man. And the film's about a descent into anti-Semitism.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm not saying it's true. I read it. There's a lot more to it back like 5 years ago when I read it.
Oh, my God.
But it was a thing where I watched the movie a little bit differently now, where I'm like, is this actually that way?
Holy crap. You could interpret that, even if that theory was, not intended whatsoever. It's still like, there's so many like ways you could interpret that.
Yeah, and like with like if this was a movie made by, I don't know, Michael Bay or something, I'm like, no, that's ridiculous. But being a Nicholas Winding Refn movie, I'm like, yeah, that's possible. I could see it. I don't think he's an anti-Semite or anything, but I could see him making a movie about that and just slipping it in subliminally.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting idea. And, if it wasn't kind of like, if the villain's characters that didn't make that a big deal in the movie, then I'd say, complete bullshit. But it is kind of like an interesting kind of little detail, right? When you think of it in that way, it's certainly unsettling. That mask is unsettling in the same way you would kind of see the like a neo-Nazi in the dark in the woods, like being a neo-Nazi or whatever it is happens in that kind of culture. I mean, so it gives you that kind of scary vibe. That mask is horrifying to look at. I hate it.
It is, but I also think I don't know why, but it always cracks me up seeing him look through the mirror with that fake face. Something about that shot
it's simultaneously. So here's what it is. It's simultaneously horrifying and hilarious. I think we watching a movie, our inclination is to view it as hilarious because it's just silly. Like it's Ryan Gosling in a freaking stunt double mask, and that's clever, haha. But if you take it out of the movie and like you imagine yourself going to the gas station at night or something to like some food, And then just imagine walking outside and seeing that shit. I would crap my pants and like scream like a girl.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's a very fine line between horror and comedy, of course, and
Right.
and it definitely falls on both sides of that line.
Yeah, well, exactly, because like Michael Myers is kind of like a similar, fake face get up, and sometimes I think Michael is creepy as shit, and then sometimes I'm like, what an idiot! He looks like a dumbass. Like,
Oh yeah, definitely depending on the movie. Some of the masks in those ones, even the better sequels, like Halloween 4 is a really fun horror sequel. That's a staple of October, I think. But like that mask, and he's got a weird afro in that one. Like, what the fuck were they thinking?
there's definitely a little lack of consistency there in the scariness of it.
So, one thing I want to point out is just how well the film does character dynamics, because the film, you don't think about that. You think about like the scenes of him driving and the music's booming and all that. And you think about all the feels and the emotional journey it takes you on. Really, this is almost a Joseph Campbell-esque, just hero's journey tale told very simply. It boils it down to its basest elements that then allows it to connect with the audience in a way that's somehow more carnal and more visceral, especially for men, I think, because it allows you to self-insert more. It doesn't give you too much of a character, but it's enough. Like you said, Driver doesn't have a name proper. So even though it is a meme, even though it's silly, I hate to say it, but you do watch that movie and you're like, yeah, that's me. If people really knew what a badass I was,
Right.
I'm very sensitive and lonely. But like, the film works on that way, as silly and embarrassing as it is. It's a weird male. It's not a male power fantasy necessarily, parts of it are. It's also a male fragility fantasy, where you want to be that cool while being that vulnerable.
Right. And I think there's something to be said that almost every horrible character in this movie is also a man. All right, my fiance sneezed.
Bless him.
Bless him. All right. What was I saying? I lost it. Okay, yeah. Every man in this picture depicted as a very pretty much evil person other than the main character. So I think there's something to be said about like the toxic masculinity of this movie too, which obviously is probably a force at play at almost any movie with mafia or gangs and violence to this degree. It's interesting because I understand the whole idea of the self-insert, and I just wonder how much people really go all in on that. Because I don't know how much I really self-insert. I think it's just kind of inspiring to see a movie like this and like to see like, man, this guy is learning to stick up for people and to have his own sense of self, and like it's like I'm rooting for the Driver character. I don't know if I'm self-inserting per se, or maybe that's part of what self-inserting actually feels like. But it's still a cathartic movie, even if you don't necessarily think you self-insert.
It's okay to admit that you do, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm more of a Sonic the Hedgehog instead of a Ryan Gosling, but
we all got to go fast, but we have different means of obtaining the speed.
Old habits die hard.
But
Sonic says like freaking die hard in Sonic Adventure 2, by the way, so he's actually Bruce Willis this whole time.
So like you mentioned earlier with the bad guys, and going back to character dynamics, because I didn't quite close that loop. The movie gives me a real almost Tarantino vibes in that way, where it's taking all these different influences and putting them into one cohesive project that I don't think any other filmmaker could have made, especially at this point in time.
Right.
But the character dynamics, like the bad guys, like you mentioned, they are all criminals. They're bad guys, but they're also entertaining in the way that Albert Brooks interacts with Hellboy. I can't remember his name anymore.
Yeah, Ron Perlman.
I kept thinking it's Robert something. That's like
Robert Perlman.
Robert Pearlskin. What? Who is he? Robert Plant. Um, but like, they're funny. They care about each other. Albert Brooks with Walt White, like, they're sympathetic in their own way. They're human, and it really reminds me of another director. I've been watching his movies lately, Craig Zahler, who did Bone Tomahawk, Brawl in Cell Block 99, Dragged Across Concrete, and of course, Puppet Master, The Littlest Reich.
I've heard of some of his movies. I've never watched any though.
Oh, they're all great. They're so well done, and it's very similar to this film, in my opinion. They're very different from it, but the ways that they work in terms of screenwriting and just like how they portray violence in the characters it's just that same. It scratches the same kind of itch for me.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I agree about that point. It's you do get the sense of like, I've kind of understood it as kind of maybe more realistic mafia depiction where it's like people are aware of the dynamics and the circumstances of, well, if you cross us this way or this way, it doesn't matter how we feel about you, you have to die. I think that gets across very well. One of my favorite scenes for these villains, though, is when Albert Brooks' character, stabs the other guy in the eye, like the henchman or whatever, and then stabs him in the neck, and he's like, "Hey, fuck you! Now you have to clean up after me." That's such a savage dunk. It's done so well. I didn't expect it because I didn't remember it even, for my first time. So it was like I was shocked again all over. So it was nice.
It is, and what's so shocking about it too is like it's in like daylight in some pizzeria. Like you would just like stop in for a slice while you're walking on Main Street.
Yeah, right. Really makes you think. Like, maybe this was that just really speaks to the I don't give a fuck of the situation at that point, which kind of makes it even scarier in a weird way.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got to get into Carey Mulligan because she's so great in this movie, and Oscar Isaac is her husband who's getting back from jail, and they have a son together. And it's fascinating because you want Ryan Gosling to swoop in there. You want him to break up the marriage.
Right.
But they're all well-rounded, sympathetic characters. Like Oscar Isaac, there's a scene where when they first meet, is, "Oh, hey, you're the guy that's been helping out with my wife." And it's kind of like tense. He's like, "I just want to say thank you for that." And he shakes his hand. But you could tell there's a tension there. I just think that scene is so well done. And you get his coming home party with everybody, and the scene with them all at dinner, talk about how they met. And it's just, they very easily could have just made Oscar Isaac's character a total piece of garbage, abusive husband, and she's a damsel in distress that needs saved. But there's so much more complexity there that he at least seems like a guy that wants to get out and just be a family man.
I agree. When I think the way they handle that is one of the best parts of the story, like of the plot writing. Because like you said, it would have been easier to make him this shill asshole. And I didn't remember all of the elements of the story because it's been years since I watched this movie. So I actually misremembered, and I got my expectations subverted all over again because I was kind of expecting him to be like, "Oh, Colton, guess what? Like, he's lying. He doesn't want to get out of the game. He's going back into whatever shady business he was doing." But no, he's not. And I just didn't remember the complexity of the character. And then, he's trying to get out of it. And then Ryan Gosling's character, he could have easily been written with less complexity too, and would have been that hero moment of like, "Oh, I was too vain to see that this guy was all right," but he becomes sympathetic too, and they're all kind of like on the same side, and then they're having that one dinner scene where Oscar Isaac is talking about how he and Carey Mulligan met about, hey, where's the deluxe version of me and stuff. And it's just like, it's kind of charming, and it's just like a silly dad joke, but it really makes these characters feel more human. And I think that really propels the rest of the movie once his character gets killed off, and it's like, oh shit, now stuff has hit the fan for real, for real. It's not just tense anymore. It's just full on, full throttle against these bad guys at that point. And he pins, that other lady to the bed. You really kind of like, even though it's kind of like a startling glimpse at like male on female aggression for a movie. I'm not saying, she definitely like deserves, to be that to be angry at, right? But to even show that, like, you do feel sympathetic toward the driver, because he cares about the kid, and the kid just lost his father, and it's like you really just kind of get placed in all of these perspectives in this movie really well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that's so interesting about that death scene, is that it's like it easily could have been a thing where they don't get along, but they're forced to work together, and then he's dead. But oh, that's cool, actually. Now I could, sleep with the mom. But I think you tell Driver's actually upset because he genuinely cares about the family, even
Right.
though the guy is kind of in his way, so to speak. And that plays a part, especially in the finale of the movie, where you see him being selfless and you see him being just a hero, where even though this guy who is really inconvenient in the scheme of the Driver's narrative, he still cares about him and wants him to make it out okay, because he cares about the family, not selfishly because he actually cares about them. And
Exactly.
then once he
I
dies,
think.
you go
Oh
ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
no, go ahead.
All right, so when Oscar Isaac does get killed, even though it's it's probably going to happen at some point in the movie, the way it happens and when it happens is just really well done. I always say you could tell good storytelling when you pretty much can predict what's going to happen, and then it happens, but you're still shocked. When you still see the tropes or the structure, but yet you're still floored by it because it's done so well that the critic in the back of your mind is silenced. And that's that scene for me. And at that point, yeah, like you said, once they're in the motel, it feels like anything can go at that point.
I agree with that. I kind of think it just as a testament to the scene building and the tension building, because again, the mood and the characters and the scene stuck with me over 5 years, but exactly what happened didn't. So on rewatch, I was convinced again that the I don't know what her redhead. I'm just gonna call her redhead because I don't know how else to describe her. I was convinced redhead
Bryce
was gonna
Dallas
get like
Howard.
blown away when she was like walking back with the bag, because they draw that walk out so much. They draw that part of it out so much. Then they kind of do an unceremonious, like, Oscar Isaac's coming out of the store, but that's when the gun goes off, when it's not drawn out, when it's not like forced down your throat. And I think very much not ready for that as the viewer because of the way it's filmed and edited together.
That's a good point. Is like the film knows how to play viewer expectations masterfully.
Yes, absolutely. Because again, I know it's been a few years, but I was surprised by some of the developments in the movie all over again.
One thing I want to bring up too is the ending of the movie is so interesting because it just takes place over a Chinese dinner. Essentially, they go to some
Right.
cheesy Chinese restaurant, order food, and just talk it like a negotiation. And then, of course, both parties wind up stabbing each other. But still, like, to show all of that while they're just talking at a restaurant table, which is an interesting segue into the director's next film, Only God Forgives, which has much more of that kind of aesthetic. But I've always kind of loved that. Like, there's just this offbeat kind of thing where it's not like a gag, but there's a humor to it. There's a levity to the humanity there that just really makes the next scene of violence much more visceral, but also
Yes.
just makes you care about both of the characters, the hero and the villain, more because they're grounded. They feel like real people.
I totally agree. It's kind of a ballsy move to just, and then they edit it together. They like do most of the dinner conversation and then go to the car. And then when the first stab happens, then they cut back to the dinner and they're like fake ass smiles and they're like communicating right past each other essentially because you both know that they want, the villain wants the money and to kill this fucker. And then the hero just wants to be, rid of all of this and have the family be safe. So they're pretenders, which I think is like that's the tragedy of this movie is like every character who gets killed at one point or another they were a pretender. I mean, even Oscar Isaac's character before the movie started, he went to prison because he even admits that he did something wrong and he's going to atone for it. And it's like everyone who dies essentially, is being a faker, is in it for completely their own self-interest. And, first time I watched Drive, I thought Ryan Gosling's character was going to die from his stab wound, but he didn't. And I think that was a very purposeful choice because I think it's kind of like a moral high ground statement. Because how do you interpret like him living? Because he got a very very bad stab wound too, and they could have just written him off as dying in this final act of heroism.
I think him opening his eyes at the end, once again, just really well directed, where you're just even though he's going to open his eyes, even the first time you see it, you're just waiting for it, and you're like, is he gonna do it? Is he? It's like that Toy Story 3 thing where you're waiting as he get closer and closer to be incinerated. Something has to intervene, but you're not quite sure, and so much is just gone wrong in the movie and been so violent that you're not quite certain. So it's such a major euphoria when he does open his eyes and music starts playing. But to me, structurally, I think it's just so much about rebirth and about him getting a new life, of course, with the money and everything, and just being able to move forward with his newfound, I guess you could say, identity or morality system.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's definitely part of it. And it's not a full victory either because, the family is safe, but it's a selfless, heroic act. So, it's not like he gets to be with them again, doesn't get to enjoy that kind of blissfulness of the beginning of the movie when they all hang out together. But, it's not a movie that leaves you upset because of that. It very much balances the bittersweetness very well, I think, at the end there as well.
One moment that encapsulates that for me, it's a point of no return really with that relationship, is of course when they're in the elevator, and the lighting is just so well done where it just shifts when that the guy in there has a gun. Gosling sees it, so he just starts he kisses Carey Mulligan, and the lighting just completely changes to make it like from typical elevator romantic movie scene, then goes back to normal, and then he just crushes the guy's face in.
Yeah. It all happens so fast, and the way that they go from super slow motion to normal speed, but the normal speed feels like super fast motion because of how crazy everything goes. This is one of those movies where changing the frames and filming things fast or slow or, editing it that way or whatever really has an impact whenever it's done because, it's done a few times and it's always done for a reason. It's not just for random flair. It's always got an emotional impact when it's done.
Exactly. It's
well, I mean, I think that's pretty much everything I can think about that I wanted to say about this movie. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the same for me. The one big thing I could say is that this film got me interested in Refn's filmography, and he's become someone I've always looked forward to seeing what he does next. And I've talked about some of his other movies, and he's got earlier works before this that are also very good. But one thing I just want to draw attention to is his show Too Old to Die Young. Similar to how he kind of had Ryan Gosling as his muse for a few movies, Jenna Malone is his muse in the film The Neon Demon in this TV series. And the show, I think, is the best thing he's done, especially the third and fourth episodes. Just Really, really great shit. Very methodical, very slow. Each episode of the show until the last episode is an hour and a half long, and the final episode's half an hour. But if you don't mind a slow burn kind of watch, I think it's one of the best shows of recent years. I really enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely gotta look up his filmography more and kind of learn more about it. You've definitely convinced me. But overall, would you rate Drive?
It's funny, and it's gonna seem I don't know, almost dishonest as to give in, but it's hard for me not to give it an A plus, but I'm gonna give it an A for this reason, because there's just some dialogue that, even though so much of it is kind of intentionally dissonant, there's just some points where it doesn't quite line up for me, where it's just a little too scripty. Other than that, and it's really almost a nitpick, but like, it's a very near perfect movie. I do like a few of his projects a little bit more, but in terms of just an emotional roller coaster, as far as a cinematic journey, I think this is Refn's most complete film. I think it's his most accessible and enjoyable, and I've seen it many times. I've shown it to many people, and I'll continue to do that probably the rest of my life.
No, yeah, that's very fair. I was thinking number scale, so I was gonna give it like a 9 out of 10. I think not quite perfect, but I think for some reason or another, it's like I was kind of surprised, about all the story beats being as awesome and as exciting as they were. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, because I usually remember movies pretty well for years, and it's just for some reason, like, certain elements of the story were just faded from my memory. And I think sometimes it might be because, like, this movie wants you to take away from it, like, the feelings that you had, and not necessarily what's going on. And I'm not sure if that's like a lack of something. I don't know. Sometimes maybe it's just like, certain parts of the movie are just kind of trance-like and drawn out. And it can be like slow burny in a few points, I guess. And I'm not even saying if that's a bad thing. But for me, it's not necessarily, something that really, does it for me in terms of like leaving an impact, even though this movie has so much impactful scenery and moments. I don't even know. I didn't remember this film as well as I thought I did. I don't know if that's the film's fault or it's my fault. Is it my fault, Todd?
Maybe.
I think it's just my fault. Maybe if I was 50-50. More like Ryan Gosling and establish a new film critic morality and be reborn at a 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of film being about as close to perfect as you can get without quite making that mark. And that is by no means an insult. That's high praise.
Right. And it's weird how I can feel that way, but I can't even put into words really why it is not, that 5 stars,
I mean, I think I can, in a way where it's funny because it's I was talking about how I hate this film being compared to Taxi Driver, but it's not Taxi Driver. Like Taxi Driver, you see it like, holy shit, nothing can ever come close. Whereas this film, it's really, really great, but other things have come close and other films are better. One I could say in particular is You Were Never Really Here with Joaquin Phoenix. I think that is very similar to Drive, and I personally think it's a better movie. So, I mean, Drive's awesome. I love it, but it's not the best of the best for me.
Gotcha. I need to broaden my synthwave existentialism palette, and maybe I'll be able to kind of draw those comparisons more.
Until then, I'm Todd Crawford.
I'm Eric Zavinski.
And we are Too Cool for the Comic Shop.